So I think Frady's been doing with you guys the story of Yosef and his brothers and how that happened, and right before he's about to go down to Egypt. So I want to kind of fast forward just a little bit, not so much. The Parsha is called Parshat Vayeshev. It's chapter 39 in Genesis, verse Aleph. And I'm going to be reading some of the text and giving you some statements of Chazal, of the rabbis and the Talmud and Midrashim, and trying to piece together a significant life lesson that we can, some significant life lessons that we can learn in the story of Yosef. Let me just open up my thing here. 1 second. All right. So we have here Yosef going down. So in verse 39, in chapter 39, verse Aleph, verse 1, the Torah says as follows. I'll read it and translate. The Yosef hurad in Mitzrayim. Joseph goes down to Egypt. Okay, now right away there, the verse goes down is literal. He went down from Israel, or from Israel down to Egypt. So that's a physical description. He went downward. He went southward. However, this word, whenever the Torah uses the word "he went down," always consistently means that he descended in stature. And indeed, when Judah, the fourth son of Jacob, after he gave the idea to the brothers to get rid of Joseph, and then they saw their father's reaction, Jacob, that he went into wild mourning and he never got out of it. They looked at Yehuda, who was a leader of the brothers, and said, look what you did. Your idea was terrible. You're causing such incredible pain to our father. And he eventually left his brothers and went into a self-imposed exile. And the Torah there says that he went down to a different place, and he went down physically. He went down to a new location, but he also descended in leadership from his brothers. They demoted him from being kind of their general. He, of course, regained that level, and then, of course, became the scion of the Messiah after he eventually confronts Joseph and handles that. But before that, Joseph is now being sold. He was sold multiple times, by the way. He was sold multiple times, and therefore the brothers lost track of who he ended up with, which is part of the indignities that were piled on Joseph. And eventually he was bought by the Egyptians, and the Torah says he went down to Egypt. So literally he went down physically, geographically, but he also went down in stature. Why is that? Because of the very next words in the verse. The Torah says as follows: Vayiknehu Potiphar Sris Paro. Potiphar, this guy Potiphar, plays a very important role in the story. A very high-ranking officer of the Pharaoh purchases Yosef. Okay, and the Midrashim and the rabbis and the Talmud is very clear on what happened here. Okay, this is all Torah Shabbal Peh. This is all part of our Torah. So I'm just giving you the information. I'm not making commentaries. Potiphar was gay, and he desired Joseph for his own purposes. Joseph, we're told many times over, clearly in the text and in the Midrashic and Talmudic sources, was exceedingly beautiful, abnormally beautiful, and Potiphar wanted him for his own purposes. And in fact, the Torah here says, "Vayikneu Potiphar." Potiphar purchased him, and Potiphar purchased him for his own pleasure. Okay. Now, if you look at the verses carefully, first the Torah calls this man Potiphar, and then later the Torah calls him Potiphera, adds on a letter at the end, Potiphera, which is not the same name. First he's called Potiphar, then he's called Potiphera. And again, just giving you Torah, oral tradition. The Torah and the Talmud says that's because he bought Joseph for his own purposes. And I'm giving you this piece of information not for like dramatic, salacious effect, but this is actually going to be important in a few minutes when I explain more what Joseph does with the wife of Potiphar, or what he doesn't do, I should say. That Potiphar ends up being actually what he buys Yosef for his own purposes. He ends up wanting to be with him. The angel Gabriel comes down. He castrates Potiphar. And that's noted by the change of name. First, he's called Potiphar, and then he's called Potiphera. Phera means a ripping off. Okay, so to tell us, the Torah is hinting to us that his body changed because of an act by the angel Gabriel as a kindness to Joseph, that Potiphar wasn't able to go through with his plan with Joseph. Now that detail, well, sounds kind of dramatic and maybe unnecessary to convey. It actually will be important, even halachically, in a few minutes, and I'll explain why. The Torah continues and says that God made Joseph very successful in the house of Potiphar, and everything that Joseph did and ended up becoming successful, to the point where Potiphar, even though he was unsuccessful with Joseph to be with him, and even though he got physically punished by an angel, he still let Joseph run his entire household because he recognized that everything that he did touched the gold, literally, and everything was a success because of Joseph. And so he gives him everything that he has except his wife. And the wife of Potiphar, the Torah tells us straight out, desired Joseph greatly, and she in fact made herself sick. She in fact made herself sick over her obsession over Joseph. The Gemara says that she would end up that she would go into the kitchen with her friends, and they would be cutting etrogim. There's a whole different side story there. And when they would be thinking about Joseph, it would cause them to have such like a bilbul in their minds, like a total turmoil, that they ended up cutting themselves by accident. In fact, and this whole concept of beauty in Joseph, which is a very strange concept, that we're praising one of the greatest biblical figures by his physical beauties. In fact, Jacob, when he's on his deathbed and he's blessing all of his 12 sons, he blesses Joseph. The women of Egypt would climb the fences to get a glimpse of you. And so the concept of Joseph and beauty is a very important Torah topic. It's hard to understand perhaps at first glance. However, we understand, and this is a bit of a digression, but the beauty that Joseph contained and that was so appealing and so unusual in Egypt, which is why they flocked to see him, was that they recognized that this is a person whose physical beauty matched his spiritual beauty. He was able to integrate and symbiotically make this whole personality called Joseph, which was a total, what we call a total living Kiddush Hashem. He was a total manifestation of the Almighty's presence, and he was also physically beautiful. And to live in both worlds like that and be totally integrated like that is so difficult and challenging and hard to find, that the people of Egypt were so struck by this idea, this concept coming to life, that they climbed the walls to get a glimpse of such a thing, because they didn't know how such a thing was possible. Because of course in Egypt, the seat of immorality was all about the physical. But to see that someone could be so physically beautiful, profoundly physically beautiful, and be matched by such a spiritual depth was impossible for them to understand. So they climbed the walls to get a glimpse of this. That's why, by the way, Yosef is also going to be the heralding of the Mashiach, because in the world that we live in, which is a physical world, and we know we live in a physical world, eventually this beautiful physical world will be aligned with the spiritual beauty. And so the Messiah will come from that understanding, that side of Joseph. And so Potiphar's wife, the Torah kind of, explains her away, if you read it superficially, as this, the seductress. But really, she was someone who recognized this quality of Joseph, that he was incredibly beautiful, but there was something spiritually profound. And she actually had a prophecy of some sorts through astrology, that she was destined, that there was a union destined to be with Joseph and her, which would produce children. This was a true prophecy. Now, it wasn't from her herself. It was actually later on, she adopted a daughter called Osnat. It's actually a popular Israeli name nowadays, Osnat. She adopted her, and Joseph married Osnat and gave birth to Ephraim and Menashe. This actually happened. So she was incorrect about herself, but she saw that this was going to happen. Anyway, she keeps at it. She keeps on wearing down Joseph day after day. The Midrashim say that she would change outfits twice a day to entice him. She would threaten him. She would blackmail him. She would say, if you don't do it, if you don't be with me, I'll throw you in jail. He said, and his response was, the Almighty releases the prisoners, which is one of the blessings we say in the morning. She said, if you don't do it, I'll blind you. I'll order the palace staff to blind you. He said, the Almighty is the one who makes people see. Again, one of the blessings in the morning. She said, if you don't do it, I'm gonna make you an invalid. I'm gonna cripple you. She said, the Almighty is the one who straightens the bent. Again, one of the morning blessings that we say. And so over and over again, she tries to beat him down, and she's not successful. And Potiphar himself said, you can have everything in this house besides my wife. Now, eventually, Rashi points out that Yosef kind of let this get to his head, and he ended up beautifying himself. Rashi says a medrash that he would eventually stand in front of a mirror, he would curl his hair or comb his hair or whatever have you. And the Almighty said, you're busy looking in front of a mirror, making yourself look nice. This is why I have short hair, so I don't spend time in front of the mirror doing that. The Almighty says, you do that, I'm going to send the bear after you. That's what he says. That's the language of the medrash. And the next day was a pagan holiday. The sources tell us, the Talmud tells us it was the Pharaoh's birthday, where it was a national mandatory celebration. The entire household emptied. Potiphar's wife tells the house and her husband that she's sick. She stays home. Yosef comes in to do his work. There's a fascinating debate in the Talmud. The Torah says, let me just find the verse. I can't find it, sorry. Oh, Vayihik Hayom Hazeh, and it was on this day. Vayavo Habaita, he came to the house, La'asot Malachto, to do his work. So there's a debate in the Talmud what doing his work means. Either means to do his work in the household that he was supposed to do, or there's another opinion that says he came to succumb to her. He couldn't handle it anymore. And at the last minute, and this is a powerful medrash, at the last minute when he was about to succumb, an image of his father Jacob appeared in his mind, where Jacob said to him that there's the Kohen, the high priest, is destined to wear the choshen, the breastplate that hangs over his chest with the 12 stones that will illuminate with instructions from the Almighty. He said, and if you sin with her, you will lose your merit to be one of those 12 stones. It will be 11 stones. And with that, the Torah says a powerful phrase. She grabs onto his coat, and she says, lie down with me. And the Rashi says she didn't even want to be with him anymore. She just wanted to lie down next to him and be in his presence. And he ran away from her. The Torah says he ran out of the house. And the Talmud says at that moment he ran outside. Literally, he ran outside the house. He just ran out as fast as he could. Faster than I can even run out of the house when I see a broccoli kugel. But he ran out of the house means he ran outside of himself. At that moment, the Torah means to tell us he transcended his free will. Like he went beyond a normal free will choice, and he reached a certain level that was almost angelic. And that at this point on, that's what cemented him as being the Messiah, or at least the Skion, the Messiah. So the Midrashim, though, and this is what I want to hone in on a little bit. The Midrashim tell us an incredible little dialogue that happens between Joseph and the wife of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife, again, is fueled not by total lust. There seems to be some of that as well, or a lot of that, but she's fueled by this prophecy, this vision that she sees that she's destined to be with him in some manner that gives birth to children that will, start the Davidic dynasty, or the Messianic dynasty. The Davidic dynasty came from Judah, the other brother. And so she says to him the following, and this is a dialogue that you have to fill in the gaps with. And she says to him the following, that, right? She says to him, what's your problem? She says, it doesn't make sense that you won't be with me, right? There's no YouTube, right? Nothing will go viral. Number one, no one will know if we do this. Number two, she says to him the following. This is sourced in the Talmud. She said, I was never married to my husband. My husband was a homosexual. That's why he bought you, Joseph. And he and I were never actually together, and we never consummated the marriage. So she said, halachically, if I'm with you, Joseph, there would be no adultery, halachically, because I'm never married to him. Number three, she says, right, and even though I'm not Jewish, she tells him, I'm not Jewish, but I've read the stars, and there's clearly a prophecy, and you can see it yourself. And she showed it to him, and he says, you're right, there is something that's going to happen. From you and I, there's going to be two righteous people that will be born. And he says, you're right. So she says, so what is the problem? They have a very intense kind of logical dialogue about this. And Joseph gives her three answers. And the answers are the answers that are recorded in the verses themselves. And these three answers, I think, are so powerful, so powerful. Joseph says to her as follows. He says, maybe you're right. There is something destined to come from you and I. There is no halachic problem per se. Maybe you're right, right? And clearly there's something there from Hashem that is telling us that there's supposed to be a union between us that gives birth to these two children that is going to be the skin of the Messianic Davidic dynasty. However, here's why this cannot happen, Joseph says. And he presents to her his case why this cannot happen. And this is the wording of the Torah. Let me find the verse. Listen to what Joseph says. First point, in verse 8, the Torah says, Vayima'ain, and he refused. Joseph refused. And Vayomer el Eshet Adonav, he said to the wife of his master, Hein Adoni lo yada'iti ma babayit, v'chol asher yesh lo natan biyadi. My master, your husband, does not know that this will happen, and he has given me everything in this house. In other words, he's telling her, it may not be a sin, and it may be halachically correct. But you know why it's wrong? Your husband trusted me. He gave me the keys to his household. He made me the master of that whole household and gave me everything except you. I cannot be an ingrate and succumb to you. It would be like saying no thank you and giving a slap in the face to my master, your husband. Joseph gives a moral argument, not a Torah argument, not a halachic argument. He doesn't run away. He says, it's just wrong. People inherently know right and wrong. This is wrong, not from a Torah perspective, not from a halachic perspective. My master, your husband, is giving me control over everything. The one thing that he asked me not to do is what you're asking me to do. I just can't do that to him. It's not grateful. Yes, even though the Almighty seems to want us together, I cannot do it to the master. Here, Joseph seems to even overcome or overrule God's law. He's agreeing to her. He agrees to her that there's something in the stars. And he says, this must happen somehow, but I cannot be an ingrate. It cannot come through a lack of gratitude. What a powerful lesson. It's like a moral basic argument. I cannot do something that shows lack of gratitude. Here's the second point he makes. This is a more subtle point. The Torah says, Vayima'ain, and he refused. Okay? Now, the last time the Torah used the word Vayima'ain, which means that he refused, was, guess when? When Jacob was told by his brothers, by his sons, that Joseph died, and they gave him the coat with many colors, right? And there was blood on it. So Jacob says, that my son Joseph was killed, and the Torah says, and he refused to be comforted. That's the last time the word Vayima'ain was used, same biblical word. The last time it was used was back then. In other words, the Torah is linking these two events. Joseph understands, how can I do this? There's someone that still believes in me. My father still believes in me, and and the Torah is telling us that he's linking the father and him. My father still believes in me. He's still in mourning. He refused to be comforted because I was gone. I refuse this. The Torah is linking the two experiences. And as long as someone believes in me, I can never give up. This is just a powerful, beautiful lesson. It's not a Torah lesson. It's not a halachic reason he's giving her. He's saying, someone believes in me. Someone thinks I can do this. Someone thinks I can be strong. And even though I haven't seen my father in 22 years, and he thinks I'm dead, a part of him still is with me, and a part of me is still with him. And how can I give up knowing that someone has my back? Isn't that incredible? That's the second thing that he believes. He knew that a father had refused to give up on him. That's why he didn't give up on himself. If we knew that everyone on earth gave up on you, right? Then we give up on ourselves. But if we know that someone still believes in us, whether it's not even your spouse, God forbid, a father, a mother, a friend, your friend in Australia that still believes in you, that will be enough to keep you going. So he saw that his father didn't give up on him, and he wasn't going to give up on himself. No matter how far your children are from you, geographically or even spiritually, you can never give up on yourself, ever, ever, ever. You know, East Toronto was founded in 1981 by 5 families. My father was one of them. You probably know this. Rabbi Hach was another one. One of them was, his name was Rabbi Moshe Avrik. He passed away yesterday from corona in Israel. The funeral was this morning. I watched it at 8:30 in the morning. His kids eulogized. I grew up with 2 of his kids, Sarah and Joshi. They're very, very serious people, live in Jerusalem. There's another son, Donnie, who I sort of knew, but he always had a lot of challenges, let's say. And he eulogized, and he said, and he was barely able to get the words out. It was very heartbreaking. He said, you know, Dad, even though I didn't give you an easy time, I never once for a moment thought that you like despaired or gave up on me. Like you always consistently loved me, even when I was not listening or rebellious and didn't understand. And even with all my questions that I drove you crazy about, you always believed in me. And because of that belief, and in the last few months when I saw you suffer, he apparently really did not have an easy, end. I don't have any more questions, and I'm really at peace with my questions because you were there for me, because you really believed in me. And I listened to that funeral, and then I was thinking about this, and it's so true, right? I mean, you never know when it'll be, you never know when it'll snap into effect. But as long as you know that someone hasn't given up and you can't give up on yourself. There's an amazing person, you should all Google him after we're done. His name was Rabbi Ronnie Greenwald. Rabbi Ronnie Greenwald was actually he's a fascinating person. He's an American-born rabbi. He's like this classic character. He had suspenders and like a big, like 6'4", 300 pounds, like suspenders, very loud, but an incredible Jew. He founded a camp called Camp Sternberg, which was it started off as a camp for special needs, and then it expanded. My wife went there for 12 years. She said he was an incredible person. He would ride around in a golf cart, just talking to all the girls. He ended up being instrumental working with the U.S. State Department, freeing Jewish prisoners and refuseniks. He was like one of those crazy Renaissance jack of all trades guys. He was actually the one who secretly brokered the deal to free Sharansky. He flew on Shabbos to Moscow and negotiated with the U.S. government and got him out of there. There's stories of him. He flew on Pesach on Seder night. He left his house and flew directly to Africa, to Mozambique, to negotiate the release of a bunch of Israeli prisoners who were being held hostage. So Rabbi Ronnie Greenwald, like my wife said, he never gave up on any single Jew. Like Rebbitzin, like my teacher, Rabbi Weinberg, but like Rebbitzin, what's her name? I just drew a blank. Rebbitzin Youngrice, right? These people, like they never give up on people. And if you never give up on a Jew, then you know that you can never falter. That's what Yosef is saying. Finally, the most and to me, I mean, those are powerful enough, but to me, the most powerful thing that he says, Joseph, is the second sentence. Eineni gadol b'bayit hazeh mimeni. There is no one greater in this house than me. Your master is not, my master is not, you're my master, your husband has not withheld anything from me. Except for you. Because you're his wife. And listen to what he says. How can I do this evil thing? It's a pure moral argument. It's not a godly argument. It's not a Torah argument. It's not a halachic argument. How can I hurt another person, even though it's Potiphar, a non-Jew, Egyptian, who bought him for his own personal pleasure? But Joseph's saying he's a human being. How can I hurt him? How can I do this evil thing by hurting another person? And then he says at the end of it all, v'chatati le'elokim, and I will have sinned to the Almighty. He says it at the very end. It's amazing. That's the first, Joseph's a religious guy, right? He goes to Minyan, probably puts on tefillin, has a beard, probably chuckles a lot. But the godly part is the very last argument that he makes to her. Probably, and not because she's an Egyptian and a non-Jew and non-spiritual. She's the one who's bringing the whole proof. The proof is in the pudding that he and her are destined to give birth to greatness. but he doesn't even go with God. He says these three powerful arguments. Number one, he's given me everything. How can I be ungrateful to him? Number two, my father still believes, someone believes in me. How can I give up on myself? Number three, how can I do this great evil? How can I hurt another human being? And we're all created in the image of God. And right before you guys came on, I was watching Biden speak, and there's a speech that Rabbi Jonathan Sachs of blessed memory, whom I miss very much, even though I never met him, one of my great regrets is that I never met him in person. I could have once, but I didn't. But one of the greatest speeches I've ever heard by Rabbi Sachs, and there are quite many of them, he was speaking in America, and he said that it was a non-Jewish crowd. Maybe it was his TED talk that he gave. I don't remember, but he said that the greatness of America, he said, is that you are founded upon Judeo-Christian, really Judeo values, but he didn't say that, values in which there is a belief in the indivisible unity under God, which Biden said a few times. He said in England, we're bound by a monarchy. That's how the country started. That's how it still is in that style. And in that style, the monarchy is believed to have been ordained by God, right? But here, what binds you Americans is the collective notion that, of Judeo values, that we are all in it together and we have mutual and collective responsibility. He said that is the most powerful, intoxicating motivation to keep the country united, and that is why America has remained united, right? And this is why England has lost most of its empire, because when you believe in the divinity of a human, and when you see that human is not so human, not so divine after all, then everything will crumble beneath it. America has really faltered when men have tried to play God, okay, without getting into great political commentary right now. And so I was heartened to see Biden say this, and I believe that Biden is a man of God. It is disheartening that there's more intermarriage. I was just telling Jody this. There is more intermarriage in his immediate and larger family than in any other presidential family in history. But he is a man of God. He is a man of faith, and that is what America needs. And I think there will be more healing going forward, putting aside what happens to Israel, etc. We need to see if there's basic principles in the decisions that we're making. We learned this from Joseph. Number one, am I hurting someone else? Period. Am I hurting someone else? Joseph was concerned to hurt a man who bought him for his own physical pursuits. He said, I can't do this evil and hurt your husband. I can't do it, number one. Number two, he knew somebody still believed in him. He knew his father still believed in him. So he can't give up on himself. If someone still has not given up on you, you don't give up on yourself. Number three, he can't show ingratitude. He can't be ungrateful. Your husband has given me everything besides you. He has made me king of this household. From the depths of prison, he took me out. For that, and although he took me out for his own pleasure, but he took me out of the worst place on earth. Egypt, the most depraved society, and the prison of Egypt, which was the worst of the prisons of the worst country. Who knows? There were all sorts of miracles that happened to happen to Joseph in prison. A man of that beauty in prison for that long in that kind of a country, Hashem was protecting him. I mean, and that's before the dreams that he interpreted that got him freed from prison. I can't do it. I can't hurt another person. And then finally, and I will sin to God. I think we go through various rationalizations, right? But at the end of the day, the very last thing that someone has to ask themselves after, will this disappoint the people who believe in me? Number two, will this show a lack of gratitude? Number three, will this hurt another person? The final thing, number four, is the chatati lelokim. Is there God in this? Is God in this picture? What would he say? WWJD, what would Jesus say? Or what would Jesus do? Those bands. So WWJD, what would God do? Okay, would he approve of this scenario? And Joseph answers all four. He goes through all four questions. The God thing is the last thing, though. And it's, to me, it's just incredible that Joseph goes through a dialogue with her from a moral perspective, perspective of humanity. And he concludes with the God argument. And right after he says that, she realizes that she's beaten, and that's when she tries to physically like grab him, and then he runs out of the house. The Torah doesn't say any more dialogue after that, because she realized he's answered away all the arguments that she can make. Is this what Hashem wants from me or not? It requires intelligence. It requires a lot of prayer. And I think the frustration that I hear from a lot of people nowadays is that people don't see other Jews, perhaps necessarily right now, acting in a way that demonstrates that God is on the forefront of their minds. Or if they are, it may be to them a warped perspective of what Hashem wants. Of course, we have to have a wedding with whatever hundreds of people without masks. Hashem wants us to get married. It's a mitzvah to get married. Marriage is the uniting of heaven and earth. So goes the perspective. What can I say? Yes, he does, but perhaps Hashem is also telling us not to have hundreds of people together without masks. The Almighty created a decree that has changed humanity. We have to ride with it until the decree is done. That's my personal opinion. I think the four of you here may probably agree with that assessment. That's why I feel safe saying it on this call. But the good news is the fact that Jews are so worked up against other Jews, and let's pretend that's not happening, is because they want to do the right thing. They want to do the godly thing. They don't want to do what the government says. Whoever starts quoting like the government as like the end all be all, like Doug Ford or the Pillsbury Doughboys, I call him now, which I don't like insulting people, but he has upset me to the point where I feel like he deserves an insult. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I know I'm supposed to be better than that, but I really, whatever. The mistakes that have been made are egregious and so harmful to society and to our children's well-being and mental health. But we won't get into that right now. But, like the government's not your God. There's a beautiful saying. It's actually, I thought it was, I don't think it's in the Talmud. I don't know where it's sourced, but it says, Leiv Malachim V'Sarim B'Yad Hashem. The hearts of kings and officers are solely in the hand of God. They're messengers. They're tools and pawns of the Almighty to get us to a certain place where we have to activate our free will to make good choices and bad choices. Okay? That's it. You want to say that they're out to get the Jews? I don't know. We can have that argument another time. You want to say that, Torah is king. Torah learning is the most important thing in the world, which it is. And if that is threatened, the very world is threatened. That is a legitimate philosophy. It is a true philosophy. Is it true that Torah learning is being threatened? I would submit not. We're not in the times of Hanukkah, or we have to play dreidel and hide our Sidurim under the dreidel. Okay, I mean, I'm talking to you very freely with perfect liberty. But this is what's going on, I think, and this ties in no problem, Raquel. Thank you for joining. This ties in perfectly to Joseph and what he's saying, what he's explaining to Ashes Potiphar, the wife of Potiphar. Number one, I can't be ungrateful. Number two, I can't hurt another person. Number three, someone believes in me. And number four, is Hashem in this picture? With WWGD. Those are four questions that we could ask ourselves as we learn from Joseph. And if Joseph can ask it to the woman who's trying to literally steal his world to come, the rabbis say that, right? If he would have succumbed to Joseph, the Jews would not have been freed from Egypt. There would not have been an exodus. So if he can have this dialogue and go through this with her, we can go through this with our friends, our families, our neighbors, and even ourselves. God willing, we should merit. I forgot to mention that this class was dedicated to the memory of Rabbi Applebaum's father, who passed away at the age of 97. having lived a very beautiful, full life according to Rabbi Applebaum, who I spoke to last night. It is also, sadly, I want to make a huge separation. It is actually Rabbi Applebaum's 70th birthday today. And his Hebrew birthday is today. He turned 70. And I had bought him a book and a card, and I can't give it to him. So I called his wife, and she's like, I'm like, I feel so terrible. I was going to give him his birthday present today. She's like, today's his birthday? I'm like, yeah, you told me the day before Tu B'Shvat. That's today. She's like, oh, I forgot. She's like, I don't even think he remembers. I'm not even going to tell him. He won't even like. So happy birthday to Rabbi Applebaum, to many more simchas and better ways of celebrating your birthday than sending shiva for a parent. To the memory of Rabbi Applebaum's father, who I did meet twice, an incredible, wonderful Jew. And to, as a source of, we should all just take Torah lessons, apply it to our lives, pray to God that we're all together soon in person to have these wonderful classes. And I hope that was edifying and interesting. And you can watch the rerun of the presidential debate now. I mean, the presidential inauguration now. You don't want to watch a rerun of the presidential debate. I apologize for that. That would be a horrible waste of your life if you do that. If you did it the first time, and if you do it now. Okay, thank you. And thank you, Kim. Thank you, Kim, for joining us.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Enjoy. Have a great day, everyone.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.